It's the Underdogs back with you for another week, another college football special episode. I am Jordan Brenner, joined as always by Peter Keating. Peter, how is your college football season going?
My college football season is going unexpectedly great because I believed all the doomsayers before the beginning of the season that there was going to be no suspense in college football, that everything's just smushing into a couple of giant super conferences and super teams, and all the big teams with all the big money. We're going to sign all the big players, and there wouldn't be as much suspense. Yeah, right. Um, while there are some great teams funded by great amounts of money, there are more surprises, more chaos, and shockingly enough, more teams competing at a higher level that were pretty bad last year than I could possibly have expected. And I'm sure the same is true of you too.
Oh yeah, I'm enjoying it for sure. For most of this show, we're going to talk about undefeated underdogs, which is going to be really fun. Teams that have been surprises, and may have a few surprises left up their sleeves. But Peter, you wanted to say something else first, so the floor is yours.
Well, I just thought we should spend a minute talking about Texas, Georgia, because this is yet another game where you can see a regular season matchup that could be a national championship preview, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where there's a lot riding. And you have been talking for a while about how the expanded you've explained it to me how the new expanded format could mean that teams with two losses sneak into the championship playoff, right? And so if Georgia loses this week to Texas, could they still qualify for a top spot? It's a really interesting question. Most of all, I'm interested because when Alabama played Georgia, we talked about a conflict between the rankings and home field advantage. Well, in this case, they both point towards Texas. You know, a team with home field advantage that's ranked playing another ranked team. You know, these teams are really well known. You really can't go for the underdog in this situation. But why it's analytically interesting, Jordan, is because Texas is one of those teams that ranks great in the numbers because they've been destroying opponents, not because they've been destroying strong opponents. The three power conference teams that Texas has beaten, they've beaten soundly: Michigan, Mississippi State, Oklahoma. But Jordan, those teams all rank 59th or below in offense in the country. So if Texas wins this game, they're going to win it against an opponent whose passing game is the likes of nothing they've faced so far, and they will deserve it. So there's a lot on the line for these both teams looking down the road at their national championship aspirations.
Well, speaking of the road, Peter, you also had something you wanted to mention about travel that you've
Well,
observed so far this season, right?
this is crazy. You know, there's a stat floating around how Big Ten teams, now Big Ten teams range from where? Rutgers to Oregon, right? In terms of the span of distance they can travel. Big Ten teams with Ohio State's loss to Oregon are now 3-10 when traveling two or more time zones for a conference game. It's crazy because before this year, when would you ever have to travel more than two time zones for a conference games? Conferences used to be regional. Here's what I wanted to bring up: home dogs. Okay, when the visiting team comes from the Pacific Mountain or Hawaii time zones, home dogs are 42, 28, and 1. And the games are happening more frequently. This was when Boise State, their only loss, came to Georgia Southern. USC lost to Michigan. Utah State, in a big upset, lost to Temple, 45-29. These games all fit that category. Fits two really interesting games this weekend. USC at Maryland, coming again across the whole country. USC, Maryland, a 7.5 point underdog. Oregon at Purdue. Purdue has this long record of upsetting number 2 ranked teams. They're 27.5 point underdogs. This is a time to take these home dogs. I mean, their spreads are pretty big, but the visitors, the travel on the visitors is starting to show up in the data.
Hey, anytime I have the chance to bet on a 1-5 team that's given up 234 points, I'm going to do it, baby. Go Boilers.
Anytime,
Boiler up.
almost anytime you get 27.5 points, it's almost worth doing it, especially for guys playing against guys who are just wandering off an airplane.
Just so I make sure, do you control for time distance traveled, or is it just against an opponent from any time zone?
I'm sorry, it's Western teams coming east. So it's Eastern time zone home teams against teams coming from the Pacific Mountain or Hawaii time.
And I'm guessing that was from the amazing Action Network Bet Labs tool.
You know,
correct?
I don't know what you're getting paid. Probably nothing, but you always beat me to the acknowledgement before I can say anything. You always mention Action Labs. They're great. Go check out the Pro Network. Our friends at Action Network supply a lot of this cool data.
Yep. Well, on to other cool data, Peter, because as we promised last week, the initial 7 teams that we looked at as unranked in the preseason, possible playoff spoilers, haven't lived up to their billing, but someone was going to emerge, okay? And there are a few undefeated teams who have flown below the radar. They're all in the top 25 now, and I want to touch on them. And they're ranked. You've got Iowa State 6-0, ranked 9th in the country. You've got BYU 6-0, 13th. Indiana 6-0, 16th. Pittsburgh 6-0, 20th. And then the two best underdog stories, and this is where we're going to start, the service academies. Army 6-0, ranked 23rd. Navy 5-0, ranked 25th. Peter, did you know, and I saw this in a really good AP story written about the service academies. First of all, this is the latest in the season that both teams have been undefeated since 1945. Secondly, that's when Doc Blanchard was playing for Army, okay?
Wow.
Secondly, both teams haven't been even ranked in the top 25 simultaneously since 1960. And if that isn't enough, here's why this is an amazing underdog story in today's era. These teams can't use the transfer portal to bring in players. They can lose players to the portal. They can't bring in transfers, and they can't give NIL money. Here's a quote from Navy linebacker Colin Ramos, a senior captain, from that AP story I mentioned. He said, quote, "It's different because these are guys you've worked with, gone to class with, have done all these military trainings with. There aren't 50 new guys on the team each year." And that's where I want to start, because we always talk about zigging when everyone else is zagging. Could the portal and the upheaval and the changing of personnel on a yearly basis, we've talked about yearly free agency, have actually opened up an opportunity for teams that can capitalize on cohesiveness?
Okay, so first of all, when I hear things haven't happened in the Army or Navy since 1945, it makes me wonder, did they get to draft people during World War II and then put them on the football field? Was the whole country playing football for Army and Navy back then? Because I don't know how else that happened. But more important, Jordan, doesn't this strike you as a kind of story that could build on itself, a kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because we've talked a lot, even last year, even before NIL, talking about Air Force, right? A really well-managed football program with a distinctive style of play. We have talked about how the service academies have some built-in loyalty, right? You usually never, be with or without transfer portal rules, with or without Ohio State level NIL money, you probably weren't ever thinking about going to Navy to transfer to UCLA to begin with, right? There's been continuity in these programs. If they could be taken seriously by recruits, if they could be well run and well managed, then there's a foundation there that seems that it could be really successful in this environment. What they needed was this kind of season, I think, and then it could take off. What do you think?
Yeah, no, so I just think it's fascinating. Look, we have to acknowledge neither team has played the most daunting of schedules yet, okay? Army has
Right.
beaten Lehigh, Florida Atlantic, Rice, Temple, Tulsa, and
Oh,
UAB,
oh, oh.
okay?
And Jordan, of course, they have to play each other in the Army
Well,
Navy
I'm
game,
going to
so
get to that in
they
a
can't
second.
both end undefeated, sadly.
Right. Navy, Bucknell, Temple. Their Memphis win was the most impressive. They scored 56 points on Memphis.
Yes.
But allowed 44. UAB and Air Force. Now, big test, same team looming for each of them. Navy plays Notre Dame at MetLife Stadium um, on the 26th of October, and then Army plays Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium on November 23rd. So big tri-state area tests against Notre Dame, and then obviously, yes, they play each other to end the season as they always do on December 14th.
Did you just say the tri-state area?
Yeah.
All right. Which 3 states are you referring to? You should. I mean, there's
only one
area.
tri-state
No,
area
no,
that
Jordan,
matters,
there's
Peter.
tri-state areas all over the country, just like there are Springfields all over the country. But we're talking about, of course, New York City, Long Island, and upstate New York, right?
Thank you. Yes, they'll be playing in Jersey and Yankee Stadium. But
There you go.
look, this is an awesome story to follow. It's not like these teams have really tough opponents outside of the Notre Dame game and playing each other left. So
Jordan, I
let's
want to
stay on
mention
this.
one
Yeah.
quick thing. Last year, the Supreme Court of the United States essentially outlawed affirmative action, specifically exempt from that ruling, which affected not just Harvard, which was the lead university in one of these cases, but also North Carolina, big public schools everywhere, specifically exempt the service academies. There are a lot of big public schools that are going to be struggling over the next 3 to 5 years to define their admissions criteria Army and Navy are going to be able to recruit on the basis of wanting a diverse environment to help their campus. That's constitutional at Army and Navy. It's not constitutional everywhere else, Jordan. It's interesting.
I don't understand how that makes a difference, though. Teams can recruit athletes however they want. It's not
No,
like
they
they're
can't. You cannot recruit anybody however you want. You have to recruit on the basis of much more restrictive criteria now. You can't recruit anybody on the basis of thinking that recruiting that kind of person, however you want to define that, is just going to improve the campus environment.
Wait, you're claiming that the University of Georgia can't bring in the best football players because affirmative action has been struck down?
I'm just suggesting that
It's completely has nothing to do with it.
you should look at big public universities and see just what percentage of students who don't happen to be white are athletes on campus at big
Yeah,
public
so I guess
universities.
they'll bring in fewer. It's just going to hurt the non-athletes. It's not like Michigan's going to stop bringing in the best football players. So now, if you're a minority, you'll just have who's a non-athlete. You'll have less of a chance of getting into Michigan theoretically. It's not gonna hurt your.
Theoretically, but it also might affect who they get to bring in for whatever reasons they want because their reasons are no longer valid
I mean,
constitutionally.
it's cute that you think the admissions office has anything to do at this point with when we're paying college athletes and transfers can come from wherever that
I'm
anyone's
just saying it's
overseeing.
going to be something that schools are going to have to deal with over the next 5 years. I'm going to see. I would not have predicted they were going to be dealing with all this stuff to begin with. We don't know how it's all going to crash together.
I will put money on it that it doesn't affect anything in an athletic sense, but especially in a money generation sense, because they're not using
You
demographic
can't
information to admit
wait.
these players.
Really? Okay.
No.
Well, we'll see what counts as demographic information.
You think that Colorado is recruiting Shador Sanders based on race?
You think that the court that struck down affirmative action is going to consider it a happy accident?
100%. They're not going to mess
Okay.
with.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
If you think about the people making these decisions,
They already are. It's already happening in legacy sports. It's already
right,
happening in
they're not
legacy
going to mess with college sports. But let's move on to a team that I don't know if I want to mess with at this point. That's the Indiana Hoosiers. Okay?
This is an awesome squad, is it not?
It is and it isn't.
Well, okay.
Great offense. I don't know about the defense, but here's the thing. They're 6-0. Here's the remaining schedule. Nebraska at home, Washington at home, at Michigan State, home for Michigan, at Ohio State, home for Purdue. So they don't play Penn State. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Illinois. They get a down Michigan team at home. Purdue's 1-5. Michigan State's 3-3. Washington's 4-3. So what's looming large? Obviously the Ohio State game, which they could theoretically go in unbeaten, and this week's game against our favorite team, Nebraska.
Nebraska, 7 interceptions so far. The defense has been everything we could possibly have expected. By some measures, now the best defense in the country. Let's just hold on a minute, though. Nebraska's 6-0, okay? They haven't won a Big Ten.
No, they're not. Nebraska?
6-0. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Indiana. I'm going back to Indiana. We're talking about Indiana's off to a 6-0 start. They haven't shared or won a Big Ten title since before you were born. Maybe since I was born. I don't want to admit what year I was born.
1843.
They've since the Whigs were in power. Yeah. They've scored 40 points 5 games in a row. That's never happened in their huge, long history. So take a minute to salute what they've done so far. Yes, the back half of the schedule is much tougher than what they faced so far. But this is a team that really gets rolling on offense and now is going to face their biggest test.
So according to Sharp Football Analysis in advanced metrics, they're 4th in their overall offensive efficiency rating. They're number 1 in explosive plays. That's drives that average more than 7.5 yards per play. They've scored at least 40 points in every game except their opener against Florida International. Right. On the other hand, they just gave up a combined 52 points in their past 2 games to Northwestern and Maryland, and they've played 5 FBS teams who are combined 12 and 18.
Yeah, well, they're a lot of fun. I mean, they've had 9 scoring drives of 10 plays or more. I mean, the quarterback, it's Curtis Rourke, right? First Indiana player to have 3 touchdown passes in at least 3 Big Ten games since, I think, in 50 years. So they're fun to watch. But the collision this weekend is going to be epic between them and Nebraska.
Let's move on to a pair of Big 12 teams that are doing it on the other side of the ball, which is, first of all, unusual for the Big 12 anyway. But you've got Iowa State and BYU. Let's talk about Iowa State first. They're 6th in points allowed per drive. They rank 12th overall in defense per Sharp Football. They've got Rocco Beck, the son of former Jets tight end Anthony Beck.
That's right.
Running the offense at quarterback. And here's interesting. On the remaining schedule, there's no ranked opponent until their final game against Kansas State. Here's who they've got left. UCF at home. They're 3-3. Texas Tech at home, 5-1. At Kansas, 1-5. Cincinnati at home, 4-2. At Utah, 4-2, and then the Kansas State showdown. What are your thoughts on the Cyclones?
I think, again, like Indiana, this is a team with talent that they haven't seen in a long, long time. Carson Hansen, their running back, has more touchdowns now than he had all of last season. And I want to bring up one more important point, Jordan. Do you know what they're calling already? That game against Kansas State, which everything could be on the line. A berth in the Big 12 title game, maybe a spot in the playoff. That's right. They're calling it Farmageddon.
Well, then there's an even bigger defense, a team that they may not face until the conference championship game, and that's BYU. 7th overall in defensive rank, according to Sharp. Number 1 in play efficiency, which is basically a fancy measure of yards allowed per play. And of course, the second best story in all of college football, behind only that of the service academies. That's right. Their starting quarterback, Jake Retzlaff, just like me, a member of the tribe, a Jewish quarterback at BYU. They've already nicknamed him BY Jew. It's fantastic. ESPN did an awesome story on him this weekend. He played on Yom Kippur. He's just he and his teammates have embraced this. I think they brought a kosher food truck to campus at some point. Yep. It's so fun, and they're good.
And look, they just scored 41 points. Right now, they're known for their defense, right? Mm-hmm. But they've been crushing it, and I don't think they're going to be an underdog the rest of the season. I think they're favored against everyone else left on their schedule. Are they not?
Yeah, I mean the game at Utah looms large, I think, for both these Big 12 teams.
Which for the first time in a long time will not be the Mormon Bowl.
No, it won't be. It'll be a matzo ball. But,
let me just say, this is not a team to pass over.
Wow. Well, let's go from there. From one Jewish quarterback to another. There you go. Well, the final team on our list. Your Pittsburgh Panthers. You already won one bet with them this year. Peter, you can talk about the quarterback, but then you have to convince me that they're not undefeated through smoke and mirrors.
Well, look, we're going to assume I have not seen the kosher food truck or Jewish nicknames for Eli Holstein, but he has 1,700 yards, 15 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. Look, he's a transfer from Alabama. And one of the things that we did not, I love this subject, we did not necessarily see coming in all the chaos of the portal and the NIL money and everything been talking about is how teams that had a big hole could fill them by paying players from teams that are deep to come over to them. And this is what's worked perfectly. Look, Pat Narduzzi, the coach at Pitt, whose dad was the coach at Youngstown State, the legendary Narduzzi, like in the Steel Forges family. They went 3-9 last year, but that was basically his only bad year since 2015. They've made 6 bowls under him. He knows what he's doing. He's put together this program. They've had a very, very soft schedule, Jordan, but they're 6-0. I mean, they were 95th in ESPN's SP Plus rankings. So again, this is another team where I'm quite willing to say, salute you for the first half of the season without predicting championship potential for the back half of the season. But they're one of those teams that's made the ACC interesting through turnover.
Right, but this is the type of team like in the NFL that we would fade. It has a very Viking-esque feel from a couple of years ago, winning lots of close games at Cincinnati by a point versus West Virginia by 4. A missed field goal helps them hold off Cal by 2. Yes. A lot of games where they were trailing late. It doesn't feel sustainable, but you're right. Great story.
I didn't even think they were going to be competitive in most of those games. So if you're a Pitt fan, enjoy it. Just like if you're a Syracuse fan, enjoy what's been going on right now. Similar kind of story.
Yeah. Well, gosh, we are already out of time. If you want to debate affirmative action with Peter, you can get him on X, where affirmative action debate is really, really, really encouraged by the owner of X. So yeah, he's at Peter Keating NJ. Like New Jersey, and don't tag me.
Yeah, and until then, enjoy all these undefeated underdogs.
For sure. And we'll be back with you for more college football next week.